The sun rose like a molten coin over valley, casting long shadows across jagged ridges and rocky outcroppings. 350 Marines moved steadily along the dusty trail, weapons slung, helmets reflecting the harsh glare. Lieutenant Mark rode in the lead Humvee, scanning the valley with practiced eyes, yet a subtle unease gnawed at him. Something felt wrong. The air was too quiet. Then, like a storm breaking, gunfire erupted from the ridges above. AK-47 rounds screamed past, tearing into vehicles and earth alike. Marines dove behind Humvees and boulders, returning fire blindly, but the enemy had the high ground. RPGs streaked past like fireflies in hell, each impact shaking the ground violently. One Humvee toppled onto its side, tires shredded, flames licking metal. Marines shouted over the roar, barking orders that seemed to vanish into the chaos. Radios crackled incessantly, but the valley seemed to swallow the messages, leaving nothing but static and fear. Lieutenant's stomach twisted as he realized they were trapped in a perfect kill zone. The ridges formed a natural funnel. Retreat was impossible. Forward meant death. Every second dragged like an eternity. Amid the chaos, tried to gather his men. "Return fire, cover your buddies, hold your ground." His voice cracked over the din, but the men obeyed. Bullets tore into the dirt and rock around them. A young Marine screamed, clutching a bleeding arm, while another pressed against the Humvee's crumpled frame, eyes wide with terror. Dust, smoke, and heat combined into a suffocating haze. The enemy's fire was methodical, coordinated, almost surgical. Every corner they turned seemed to hold a sniper or a hidden mortar team. They were surrounded, pinned, and... Then above the chaos, a thunderous roar split the sky. Heads tilted upward. Metal glinted against the sun as a lone A-10 Thunderbolt II appeared, banking low over the valley. Its engine screamed in defiance of gravity, a harbinger of hope. On the radio, a calm, measured voice cut through the static. 2-1 inbound. Hold your positions. I've got this. For a moment, disbelief flickered in the Marine's eyes. Could a single jet change their fate? Throat tightened. He wanted to shout, to call it impossible, but something deep inside told him to hope. The A-10's shadow passed over them, a massive predator in the sky. Tracer rounds from the ridges reflected off its armor as it rolled with precision, coming closer with each heartbeat. Smoke plumes erupted below as enemy positions fired at the jet, but none could touch it. Barked new orders, rallying his troops. "Eyes on target, don't lose sight, cover each other." Marines peeked over debris, feeling the adrenaline surge through their veins. Bullets still whizzed past, some grazing helmets, but the morale shift was undeniable. Salvation had arrived. Amid the cacophony, a young Marine whispered to the one beside him, voice trembling, Did she hear us? Are we going to make it?" He didn't expect an answer, but the roar of the A-10 overpowered his doubt. The jets glinted as it angled toward the enemy ridges, a silent promise etched in steel. Every Marine felt it. Someone was above them, watching, fighting, willing to take the risk they couldn't. Fear was still there, thick and clinging, but hope had pierced the darkness. Looked at his men, their faces streaked with sweat, dust, and grime. They were frightened, pinned, and exhausted, yet their eyes followed the plane like moths to a flame. The valley's deadly silence had been broken by thunder and fire, and the impossible now seemed plausible. Somewhere above, a pilot had chosen to intervene. And in that moment, the Marines understood that survival might just depend on the courage of one person, flying alone against impossible odds. High above the jagged ridges of valley, Captain Carson adjusted her visor, scanning the chaos below through the A-10's HUD. The valley sprawled like a jagged scar across the earth, smoke and dust curling upward from battered Humvees. Heat signatures flickered across the terrain, pinpointing enemy positions with terrifying precision. Stomach tightened. 350 Marines were trapped below, pinned by coordinated fire. Every instinct screamed to obey command. Hold position until reconnaissance targets. But she heard them, panic shouts, calls for help, screams of wounded men. She couldn't wait, not now. The radio crackled incessantly. Command's voice cut through, clipped and firm. 2-1, hold your position, target confirmation required, do not engage. Jaw tightened. She knew the valley held dozens of ambush nests, enemy squads hidden behind boulders, mortar crews waiting to rain hell. Time wasn't on their side. Every second they waited meant more blood spilled. She had flown countless sorties, but nothing had prepared her for this. The desperate faces of Marines she couldn't see clearly, the smell of dust and burning rubber carried up from below. Her eyes scanned the ridges. Tracer rounds streaked upward, some bouncing harmlessly off rocks, others hitting vehicles, igniting fires that sent smoke curling into the sky. Keyed the mic. 2-1, engaging hostiles, hold tight, I've got you. The radio crackled, static mixing with commands she ignored. Below, Marines looked up, disbelief etched into every face. A single A-10 against a valley full of determined ambushers. The odds were astronomical. But there was something in the way the jet cut through the air, confident, unyielding. It was a promise. Someone was here to save them. Guided the jet into a dive, engine screaming as it plummeted toward the enemy ridge. Her fingers danced across the controls, unleashing a flurry of rounds from the GAU-8 cannon. Each burst shredded rock and earth alike, dust exploding into clouds that momentarily blinded the enemy. Flashes of orange and red dotted the ridges as small arms and mortars were silenced, one by one. The Marines below caught glimpses of the jet's shadow, of the pilot who had chosen to risk everything. For the first time in what felt like hours, hope surged. Yet command continued to bark orders over the radio. Abort! Negative engagement, Hawk 2-1 disengage. Visor reflected the warning signals, red letters flashing system alert unauthorized engagement. She ignored it, pressing on. Her instincts, honed through years of flying missions no one knew about, told her that hesitation would cost lives. She could see their movements below, pinned behind rocks, some crawling, some dragging the wounded. Every Marine's heartbeat seemed audible through the radio, amplified by adrenaline and fear. She whispered to herself, "Not on my watch." Knew the terrain. She had studied it, memorized every rise and valley in the region. Enemy fire came from multiple ridges, a deadly coordination that left little margin for error. She rolled the A-10 hard to avoid an incoming RPG, the cockpit shaking violently as she pulled up just in time. Heat signatures on the HUD revealed another squad attempting to flank the Marines. Without hesitation, she leveled the plane and unleashed a precise strafing run. Explosions rocked the ridge, sending militants tumbling down the rocky slopes. Smoke and debris obscured the field, giving the Marines a brief moment to move. Inside the cockpit's mind was razor-sharp. She adjusted flares, plotted escape routes, monitored fuel levels, and calculated every shot with near-perfect precision. Sweat streaked her face, heart pounding, but she didn't flinch. Every Marine below was a life she couldn't afford to lose. She spoke into the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Stay low, stay covered. I've got this." The pilot's HUD flashed, alerting her to dozens of enemy positions she would have missed without her instincts. The valley was alive with fire, yet slowly, methodically, she was turning the tide. Resolve hardened. She wasn't just a pilot today, she was a guardian. The valley was unforgiving and the enemy relentless, but she would not let 350 Marines die under her watch. Each second counted. Each burst of her cannon was a heartbeat. Below, Marines looked up at the A-10 streaking across the sky, realizing that their survival wasn't just chance, it was someone's courage, someone willing to break the rules to save them. The roar of the A-10 echoed through valley like a metallic predator hunting in the sky. Captain Carson banked sharply, feeling the jet shudder under incoming rounds. Smoke streaked past her canopy as bullets ricocheted off rocks below. The Marines were pinned, scrambling behind Humvees and boulders, their faces streaked with dust, sweat, and blood. Every second they lingered, the enemy tightened their chokehold. His hands moved instinctively over the controls, but her HUD blinked warnings in glaring red. Unauthorized system engaged. She ignored them. Lives were at stake. Command's voice screamed in her headset. 2-1, disengage immediately. You are not cleared to engage the enemy. Jaw clenched. She knew obedience could save her career or her life, but the Marines below didn't have that luxury. She studied this terrain for months, memorized the ambush patterns, and she knew the valley offered no second chances. Every hesitation could cost dozens of men. Her visor reflected heat signatures scattered across the ridges, enemy squads moving with deadly coordination. She swallowed, heart racing, and made a decision. Deep in the A-10's combat system lay a classified program, Ares, an artificial intelligence designed to calculate and execute surgical strikes with near-perfect accuracy. Banned after a past misfire, it was strictly prohibited by command. The warnings flashed in her cockpit. System use prohibited, high risk. Hesitated, her fingers hovering above the activation switch. Memories of her mentor came flooding back. He had died because she once followed orders blindly. That lesson was seared into her mind. She whispered to herself, "Not this time." One life mattered more than protocol. Her hand pressed the switch. Red markers immediately filled her HUD, tracking every enemy position with pinpoint precision. Ares spoke in a calm, mechanical tone. "System online. Target acquisition engaged." His pulse quickened, but her fingers danced over the joystick with deadly intent. The GAU-8 cannon hummed, loaded and ready. She dipped into a dive, the jet rattling violently as tracer rounds streaked past her wings. The AI guided her shots with surgical accuracy, predicting enemy movements before they happened. Every explosion below lit up the valley, carving paths through the ambush. Below, Marines gasped in disbelief. She's destroying the ridge," one shouted, ducking behind a Humvee as dirt and rock exploded around him. Lieutenant barked orders to rally the troops, though hope had already returned. They could see the difference now, the tide shifting, one precise run at a time. His voice cut through the static. "Hold tight, I've got every flank covered." She felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders, but the AI handled the impossible calculations, letting her focus on survival, positioning, and timing. Missiles streaked past, warning alarms blared, yet she stayed the course. Every maneuver was critical, every second mattered. She fired, Ares adjusting trajectories instantly, explosions tearing into enemy bunkers and mortar teams. The ambushers who had pinned the Marines were now scrambling, trying to regroup, terrified by the precision raining down upon them. Felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. She was breaking the rules, but she was saving lives. That's all that mattered. For a fleeting moment, time slowed. She dove, rolled, fired, and climbed, a living machine of determination. Below, Marines moved under cover, finally advancing as the ridge's firepower diminished. Her visor fogged with sweat. Her heart hammered. Command's voice continued to bark orders to abort, but ignored them. In that moment, obedience was irrelevant. Courage, skill, and defiance were all that counted. The Marines' survival depended on her decision, her hands, her instinct, and her willingness to break the rules. As the valley rumbled from her strafing runs, whispered quietly, almost to herself, "Not a single one of you will die today." And in that instant, she became more than a pilot. She became a guardian, a force of reckoning, the only thing standing between the trapped Marines and annihilation. The canyon shook as Captain Carson's A-10 roared above, cannon fire tearing through the rocky ridges with surgical precision. Red tracer streaks marked every enemy position, the valley erupting in dust and debris. Below, 350 Marines scrambled, stunned by the sudden turn of events. What had seemed like a death trap minutes ago now became a battlefield shifting in their favor. Lieutenant barked orders, rallying troops, but their eyes stayed glued to the sky. Each explosion from his jet bought them precious seconds, giving them hope they had long thought lost. His hands moved instinctively over the controls. Ares, the banned AI, calculated trajectories faster than any human could, highlighting enemy squads, mortar nests, and sniper positions. Each red marker flashed and disappeared as her rounds obliterated them, leaving nothing but smoking rock and silence in their wake. The enemy was ruthless, but they were unprepared for precision from above. Her jet shuddered violently as incoming fire clipped its wings, yet she maintained altitude, her mind focused entirely on protecting the Marines below. Every decision carried life or death consequences. Command's voice screamed through her headset again. 2-1, cease fire immediately. You are not authorized to engage with restricted systems. Visor reflected the warning lights flashing insistently. She ignored it, pressing on. Lives were in the balance, and waiting for permission was not an option. She banked low, dodging rockets and bullets, firing in rapid bursts, each one calculated to dismantle enemy positions systematically. Below, Marines were finally able to advance, crawling under cover, dragging the wounded toward relative safety. Hope flickered in their eyes like a fragile flame, rekindled by the roar above. Explosions tore through the canyon walls as strafed enemy machine gun nests. Smoke, fire, and dirt filled the valley like a storm of chaos. Shouted into his radio, directing his men forward. Move, move. The ridge is falling apart. Keep pushing. Marines advanced behind boulders and wreckage, their fear mingling with relief. Every time a bunker or mortar position went down, cheers erupted amidst gunfire. They could finally breathe, if only for a few seconds. His presence had shifted the battlefield completely. The enemy no longer dominated the canyon, and the Marines sensed the first taste of survival. A missile streaked past her wing, narrowly missing the A-10. The jet shuddered violently, metal whining under stress, banked sharply, deploying flares that arced like fiery comets across the sky. Smoke and dust obscured the valley as she leveled the plane for another pass. Ares flashed new targets, predicting enemy movements with frightening speed. Fired, explosions echoing, rocks shattering, the canyon shaking with every strike. Below, Marines craned their necks to witness the spectacle, inspired by the relentless fury of the jet above. Each run built their confidence, turning fear into action. Her HUD lit up with dozens of heat signatures. The enemy had regrouped, trying to flank the remaining Marines. Ignored the warnings, trusting Ares to calculate every trajectory. She dove low, firing in controlled bursts, obliterating mortar crews and sniper positions with surgical efficiency. The valley erupted in smoke and fire, a chaotic symphony of destruction. The Marines below finally moved with purpose, dragging the wounded and holding their ground as the tide turned. Through it all, his voice remained calm, almost serene over the radio. Stay low, stay covered, you're clear to advance. The Marines obeyed, emboldened by the certainty above them. For the first time, they believed survival was possible. Courage, combined with Ares' precision, was reshaping the battlefield. She had become more than a pilot. She was the fulcrum upon which their lives balanced. Every shot, every maneuver, every decision mattered. As the dust settled slightly between waves of fire, the Marines looked up, awestruck. The impossible was happening. They were still alive, and it was because of the woman flying above them, defying orders, rules, and risk to save them. A-10 screamed across the canyon, a lone guardian in a storm of bullets and smoke, and the enemy knew their advantage was gone. The chaos had shifted, and the Marines sensed victory on the horizon, though the battle was far from over. The roar of the A-10 reverberated through valley, mixing with the distant staccato of gunfire. Captain Carson's hands moved with precision, guiding the jet over the ridges as explosions tore through enemy positions below. Smoke curled upward, creating fleeting shadows that obscured her targets. She had lost count of the mortars destroyed, the machine gun nests silenced, yet the valley still held pockets of resistance. Every second mattered. Every miscalculation could cost lives, not hers but the Marines pinned beneath the relentless fire. She pressed on, a lone guardian amid chaos. The A-10 shuddered violently as a shoulder-fired SAM streaked past her wingtip, missing by mere inches. The missile's heat flared across her HUD, alarms shrieking through the cockpit. Sweat streaked her face, but she didn't falter. Below, Marines craned their necks, hearts pounding as explosions sent dirt and rock cascading down the slopes. Lieutenant shouted orders to regroup his men, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Keep moving, cover each other. The Marines pressed forward under cover, taking advantage of the temporary chaos she'd created. Every pulse of the cannon, every detonation, was buying them time. Adjusted flares, the pyrotechnics arcing across the sky like fiery comets. The enemy scrambled, trying to regroup, but Ares had already tracked them. Red markers blinked over heat signatures, guiding her cannon's fire with surgical precision. She released rounds in rapid succession, explosions ripping through ambush nests and flattening cover. The smoke and dust created visual chaos, shielding the Marines as they crawled toward safer ground. "Move fast! Stay low!" shouted. For the first time in hours, the men dared to hope they might survive. Her fuel gauge began creeping dangerously low. The engines growled under stress, warning of imminent failure. Considered disengaging, but the thought of Marines trapped below forced her hand. Every maneuver carried risk. She had to dodge missiles, avoid terrain, and maintain lethal precision. She banked sharply, flares illuminating the canyon as Ares highlighted a cluster of militants attempting to flank the Marine formation. She lined up the shot, fingers steady despite the chaos. Each round fired found its mark, detonating the enemy positions and forcing them to scatter. The tide was slowly turning. His voice cut through the static, hoarse but full of awe. "Pilot, whoever you are, you just saved our skins." The Marines below cheered, voices cracking, some tears streaking faces smeared with dust and blood. Exhaled, but there was no time for relief. Another heat signature blinked red on her HUD, a mortar team moving into a position to target the advancing Marines. She rolled the A-10 hard, aligning the cannon, and fired in a controlled burst. Explosions ripped through the boulders, sending militants tumbling down the ridge. Every moment counted, and she knew the enemy would strike again. The valley seemed to convulse under the relentless firepower. Rocks shattered, dust hung thick in the air, and the Marines pushed forward behind cover. Guided them with her voice, calm but commanding. "Advance, keep moving, I've got every flank." Each pass left the jet battered, sweat streaking her face, arms aching from the G-forces. Her pulse raced, but she trusted Ares completely, the AI predicting every enemy movement before it happened. Without the system, she would have been overwhelmed. With it, she became the fulcrum of survival, every shot saving a life. Minutes stretched like hours, the intensity unrelenting. Knew she had only one more chance to make a decisive strike before fuel and structural damage forced her to disengage. She lined up the final run, aiming at the last cluster of mortar crews threatening the Marines. Below, men paused, realizing their fate rested entirely in the hands of the pilot above. Whispered under her breath, a vow she barely allowed herself to voice. "Not a single one of you dies today." And with that, she pushed the A-10 into a dive, the GAU-8 roaring like thunder. The valley quaked under the fury of Captain Carson's A-10. Smoke, dust, and fire twisted skyward as explosions ripped through the enemy positions. Each strafing run had shredded bunkers, flattened trenches, and silenced mortars, yet knew the battle was far from over. Heat signatures on her HUD blinked incessantly. Small pockets of resistance still threatened the Marines below. Her hands were slick with sweat, her body strained from the relentless G-forces, but she didn't hesitate. She had one final pass to ensure no life was left exposed, no Marine left behind. Below, the Marines began to move with purpose. Lieutenant his men, dragging the wounded toward cover, urging those still pinned to advance. "Keep moving. Don't stop. We've got a path." Dust choked the canyon as the Marines pushed forward, their fear replaced by a flicker of hope. Every explosion above cleared a new corridor, giving them a fighting chance. The crackle of small arms fire was now punctuated by cheers as enemy positions collapsed one by one. The impossible was happening, and the Marines realized it. Lined up her final approach. Ares illuminated the remaining mortar crews hidden behind jagged boulders. She dove low, cannon roaring, unleashing controlled bursts that tore through rocks and enemy fortifications. Explosions sent militants tumbling down the slopes. The valley shook violently with each strike. Smoke and debris obscured everything, yet she saw the glimmer of the Marines advancing, shielded by the chaos she'd created. Her pulse raced, but her hands were steady. One more pass, one final run, that was all that remained to secure their survival. Suddenly, a missile streaked toward her wing. The cockpit shuddered violently, alarms blaring. Banked sharply, deploying flares in a brilliant arc across the sky. Metal groaned, warning lights flashing across the HUD. Fuel was dangerously low. The A-10 had been battered through repeated dives and strafing runs, yet she refused to disengage. The Marines depended on her. Every calculation, every maneuver, every round fired was the difference between life and death. She trusted Ares implicitly, watching as the AI predicted every enemy move and adjusted targeting with surgical precision. The valley seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Press the trigger one last time. Explosions ripped through the final pockets of resistance, flattening mortar teams, machine gun nests, and sniper positions. Smoke and fire engulfed the ridges as the enemy scrambled in disarray. Below, the Marines finally surged forward, dragging the wounded across cleared paths, their adrenaline fueled by the chaos above. Voice came over the radio, hoarse but triumphant. "Pilot, you did it. The ridge is clear. You saved us all." Relief washed over, though there was little time to celebrate. Her HUD flashed critical warnings: engines overheating, fuel critically low, structural integrity compromised. Knew she had to act fast. The valley was safe, but the jet could not return to base. She considered ejection, yet the thought of the sensitive Ares technology falling into enemy hands stopped her. The system that had saved 350 lives could not be captured. Her fingers trembled as she initiated the self-destruct protocol, ensuring that every shred of classified technology would be destroyed once she was clear. Transmitted her final message to the Marines below: "Marines, you are safe. Move to extraction. Don't look for me." Her voice was calm, almost serene amidst the chaos. She banked the crippled A-10 toward a remote ridge, engines groaning. Alarms screamed as the plane approached the explosion point. Sweat stung her eyes, adrenaline surged, yet she remained focused. This was the final act, one last gamble to ensure the Marines survived, one last strike to end the ambush completely. The A-10 flashed past the ridge, disappearing in a blinding explosion. Smoke and fire shot into the sky, shaking the canyon. Below, the Marines froze, eyes wide, stunned into silence. They had survived the impossible. Lieutenant removed his helmet, hands trembling, voice barely audible. She saved us all." The legend of the pilot who broke the rules, orders, and risked everything was already beginning to take shape, and in Valley the echoes of her courage would never fade. The A-10 shuddered violently, engines groaning under strain. Captain Carson gritted her teeth, her hands trembling slightly on the controls as heat warnings flashed across her HUD. The valley below was finally clearing, the last pockets of enemy resistance destroyed, the Marines advancing toward safety. Yet the jet's fuel was nearly gone, its fuselage riddled with damage from repeated strafing runs and near-miss missiles. Command's voice blasted over the radio: "Eject immediately. You've gone beyond protocol. You're risking the jet and classified tech." Ignored it. Obedience could wait. Survival of the 350 Marines came first. She knew that if she ejected, the Ares combat system, the AI that had saved hundreds of lives, would fall into enemy hands. Years of development, testing, and risk had culminated in this moment. This program was never meant for open battle, yet it had turned the tide. Exhaled through her visor, voice steady despite the chaos: "Not today. They survive. That's all that matters." Every fiber of her body screamed danger, yet she pressed forward, guiding the A-10 toward a remote ridge far from the Marines and their extraction point. Alarms shrieked as the jet systems began to fail. Hydraulic pressure dropped, electrical systems flickered, and the engines coughed under the strain of fuel starvation. His visor reflected a field of red warning lights, yet her eyes remained calm, focused. She initiated the Ares self-destruct sequence, a code that would incinerate the jet's technology once it left her control. A few moments later, the valley below would see nothing but fire and smoke, the enemy's eyes blinded by destruction, the Marines safe. But she could not leave alive. Her radio crackled, lieutenant's voice frantic: "Pilot, don't do this. There has to be another way." Voice calm and resolute cut through the panic: "Marines are safe. Move to extraction. Don't look for me. This is the only way." Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. In that instant, she became more than a pilot. She was a guardian, a force ensuring that hundreds would live because one was willing to die. Sweat and grime streaked her face, muscles screaming under the intense G-forces. She banked the A-10 one final time, guiding it into the optimal trajectory for the self-destruct sequence. The jet's wings shuddered as the internal countdown began. Time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. His pulse was in sync with the beeping timer, each tick a heartbeat marking both an ending and a salvation. She whispered quietly to herself, almost like a prayer, "Not a single one of you dies today." Then, with a blinding flash, the A-10 erupted over the ridge. Fire and smoke consumed the jet, scattering debris across the canyon. Below, the Marines froze, eyes wide with disbelief, mouths open as dust and heat washed over them. Lieutenant fell to his knees, removing his helmet, hands trembling. She saved us all," he murmured, voice barely audible over the wind and fatting echoes of explosions. The impossible had occurred. A single pilot had every rule and survived the impossible in their stead, but not herself. The valley grew quiet, except for the distant sound of Marines regrouping, dragging the wounded and catching their breath. Hope, raw and electric, surged through them. Sacrifice had turned what could have been a massacre into survival. The legend of 2-1 had been born, her courage, her defiance of orders, and her ultimate choice etched into memory. The A-10 gone, but her spirit lingered in the canyon, a guardian watching over the Marines she had saved. Even as the smoke dissipated, the realization settled over the survivors. Their lives had been bought with courage, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. And though she would never walk among them again, her impact was eternal. Weeks had passed since the inferno in Valley, yet the memory of Captain Carson's sacrifice remained vivid for the surviving Marines. Lieutenant stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, the morning sun glinting off the dust-streaked rocks. The valley below was quiet now and battered but free of enemy fire. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and scorched earth. He could still hear the echoes of explosions, the roar of the A-10's engines, and faintly her voice guiding them. "Stay low, stay covered. You're clear to advance." In Washington, the Pentagon's sterile briefing rooms were filled with tension. Investigators pored over flight logs, communications, and satellite imagery. The engagement with the banned Ares system had violated every protocol. Command labeled her actions reckless, defiant, even insubordinate. Yet every official report concluded the same undeniable fact. Her decisions had saved 350 lives. Her record, partially classified, reflected heroism without precedent. Medal recommendations flew across desks. Eventually, the decision was unanimous: Silver Star, posthumously. Yet the accolades could never capture the magnitude of what she had done. Lives had been preserved because one woman had dared to act when others hesitated. Back in, Marines returned to the ridge that had once been a death trap. Amid twisted metal and shattered rock, they placed a fragment of the A-10's fuselage on a stone pedestal. Etched into the metal were the words, 2-1. Every year the men returned, some dragging family, some alone, raising glasses to the pilot who had saved them. They told stories of her courage, her precision, and her quiet determination in the cockpit. Children, wide-eyed, listened as if she were a character from legend, yet every word was truth. She had been real. Lieutenant knelt by the memorial, hand resting on the jagged metal. He thought of the screams, the chaos, the overwhelming odds. He remembered its calm voice cutting through the radio static, her unwavering resolve. "Not a single one of you dies today," she had whispered. And she had meant it. Every Marine there had survived, a testament to her skill and courage. Closed his eyes, swallowing a lump in his throat. Some legends are told in stories, others are etched in the hearts of those who survive because of them. Even the enemy learned to fear her name. Reports trickled in of militants avoiding that valley, speaking in hushed tones of the ghost in the sky who rained fire from above. The technology of Ares remained classified, destroyed with the A-10, yet the legacy of its use persisted in memory, in survival, in whispered awe. 2-1 had become a symbol, defiance, precision, and sacrifice for the greater good. Months later, in a quiet room, recorded his testimony for military archives. His words were deliberate, every syllable honoring her. Captain Carson was more than a pilot. She was our shield, our guardian, and our courage. She protocol, risked everything, and ensured we lived to tell the story. Her legacy will never fade, and every life saved is a testament to her bravery. The room fell silent as he finished, the weight of her actions settling in. Carson's story spread quietly among the ranks, whispered in mess halls and barracks. New recruits heard of her courage, inspired by the woman who had flown alone into a storm of fire and emerged victorious, not for glory but for lives. In Valley, the wind still carried echoes of the A-10's roar. Marines paused on ridges, looking up, imagining her flying above them, watching, guiding, protecting. Hers was a legacy of courage beyond rules, heroism beyond measure, and sacrifice beyond calculation. And though Captain Carson never returned home, the Valley, the Marines, and the world she saved would carry her memory forever, a guardian in the sky, an indelible mark of bravery that refused to fade.